Some big gaping holes, though, were how the Jedi fight. What sort of powers did they have?
They made us take out the Gamorrean guards. We actually had the big dudes in the Mos Espa level were originally going to be Gamorrean guards.
People want to mess around a lot of times in games, and that may have saved us with this product. If we had kept it very much, you got to follow this linear path. You can't explore and do things out of the story. It may have got really boring.
In the 23 years since its release, the Phantom Menace game has become a favorite among Star Wars fans. After all, what other game gives you the choice to either have Obi-Wan use diplomacy to make his way through Otagonga, or just slaughter the entire Gungan population? Or have Qui-Gon trade parts for Anakin's pod racer, or just acquire them via other means? You see, tie-in games aren't usually known for their depth and variety, so how did this one become a sprawling sandbox? Well, I was lucky enough to sit down with the game's developers to ask them about the process of creating the Phantom Menace game. Mike Ebert and Ray West are veteran game developers. Mike was the co-founder of Big Ape Production, the game studio who developed the Phantom Menace game. He served as both the project lead and level designer. Meanwhile, Ray was the 3D modeler and animator on this project. I began by asking the guys about the start of development on the Phantom Menace back in '97, and the challenge they faced working on a game while the movie was still in production.
We were able to get a lot of assets like that, but we had a couple big gaping holes in the story. They had a script for us. And obviously the pod race scene was the big scene. We had so much footage, rough versions of the pod race. And we were told pretty much we couldn't do the pod race because they're doing a pod race game internally. Some big gaping holes, though, were how the Jedi fight. What sort of powers did they have? The entire battle at the beginning on the Trade Federation ship, we almost had nothing until maybe about a month before we shipped, and suddenly we saw footage, and we had to quickly change a lot of that stuff. The rolling, the droidica, the little rolling droids, remember those came in really late. We had no concept that those even existed. We thought, is it Panaka? Panaka was a much bigger character. He seemed in the initial scripts than we were led to believe. And then we had no idea about the sub scene. We were just told they're going to take a submarine to the other side of the thing, and that's all the script said. And it did tell us that there was this big action sequence there. So we just had lots of big gaping holes in mainly the action. At that time, George was experimenting with doing the whole movie through little 3D animatics. And I think he was solving a lot of those problems in there, and they weren't in the script. And since we didn't get to see that, we didn't know what really happened in the submarine scene. The script just said they're taking a submarine to this place. And then there was a fight in the hangar, but there was very little information about it. And so to us, the game seemed like there's not a lot of action for this game. The story's kind of a lot of talking, and there's a couple fights we don't know about. And I think that you may have hit it on your video, which is one of the reasons we say, well, if we just let people attack anything, they'll make their own action. They could fight all the monsters. They could fight whatever they want.
Next, I asked the guys about the process of working with Lucasfilm. Was there anything the studio stipulated had to be included in the game? And was there anything that was off limits?
We wanted to get all the characters in there. That was the key thing. But since we didn't know sort of how important some of the characters were, like Jar Jar probably had a bigger role than we gave him. Maybe good that we didn't give him more.
That's a net positive in the Metacritic scores right there.
That's right. And the whole thing with Coruscant, actually, we were led early on that there was going to be a lot of stuff at Coruscant, and then there was very little except a scene in a council room. So, they were in a lot of ways just as in the dark as we were. They had the same vault of information we had. We got to go up there sometimes and ask questions and take some tours of ILM, but we still weren't seeing a lot of footage until right up at the end when we had most of the game done. The only thing I think we were told is we couldn't make it a first, I think, was it Dark Forces that was being worked on at the time? We couldn't go with that sort of first-person camera angle, or they didn't even really want the third-person camera angle because that game was coming out. And Lucas always had this sort of history of, well, we couldn't possibly release two third-person shooters back to back. they have to be different. And I'm not sure that was a good philosophy, but it would always affect their design choices. This game needs to be totally different than the other one, just in the camera angle and everything.
So, one of the gameplay elements that really gave some depth to the Phantom Menace was the branching dialogue options. Was this something they planned from the start, or did it evolve during development?
The first level to get going was the Mos Espa stuff, because it was the only thing we had reference for. And we had way too much time on that level. So we started building this dialogue stuff and sort of experimenting. What if we make this a little more sandboxy and you can explore and go around and talk to people? And we'd sort of built all that. And then finally we got reference on the rest of the story and started building the other levels. So we just sort of carried it in. Because that scene in the conference room, that was thrown together at the last second after we actually saw movie footage. I remember we had a rough version of it. We saw that door, that fancy door that unfolds. We kept seeing shots of that in a concept and had no idea how it opens. We just sort of made it up. I think it opens this way. And then suddenly we saw real movie footage. And it's like, we got to change everything. There's a droid in the conference room. There's gas. We had no idea there was gas.
And of course, the branching dialogue wasn't the only gameplay element to give the player freedom. There was another element, this one a bit more sinister. You know, the ability to kill almost every character in the game. So how do they come up with that one?
You know, people want to mess around a lot of times in games, and that may have saved us with this product, because if we had kept it very much, you got to follow this linear path, you can't explore and do things out of the story, it may have got really boring pretty quickly. So by allowing people to kind of explore out and, you know, carve your own story, be the Jedi you want to be, it made it a little more fun for people to just mess around.
The level where this is probably most prevalent is the Otagonga level, where you can literally wipe out the entire Gungan population. Here is what both the guys had to say about this level and their design choices.
I think, it's a sandboxy type thing. It's like we wanted to make it so that you were experiencing the level as, you know, give you things to do, but yeah, it without the constant choices of, am I going to kill this guy, the level can get really boring. And I think that's true for a lot of things. We did put a lot of Easter eggs and little optional paths through most of the level. Unfortunately, the way that this level worked with it's a bubble, connected by a tunnel along with next bubble, it made it so that without that set of choices of being able to interact or force push or pull out your lightsaber and do them in, it does get very boring.
And we didn't have a lot of reference here. Again, we were working mostly with actors in front of blue screens and some concept drawings, so we really didn't know how much happened here and how important this was. We probably made it into more than it needed to be. I will say that I'm starting to think that some of the just general sandboxy nature was coming out of our original concept of a Star Wars game we were pitching ourselves, which was much, because I know in our original idea when we were thinking just pitching a game, it was you were going to be either a good Jedi or a bad Jedi. You go down the path of the Sith or the Jedi, and we were thinking mindset-wise that way, so a lot of this may have just blended into this game.
Now, I couldn't let this opportunity pass without asking about the infamous side quest in Theed City, where a mother asks you to rescue her son who's hiding a few buildings away. You can of course do that, or you can,
Most of the levels had like little side areas with extra things going on. I think that was just an effort to add some side stuff to that level. And I'm pretty certain at the time we didn't plan on it working that way. The save game data probably made it seem as if she knew, because the game had been saved or something at that point. Because I remember we also had some sort of like rescue the robot to the end type thing on there. There were just a bunch of little side activities you could do.
Yeah, there was an R2 unit that if you escorted him to a location, if you did that on the first playthrough of the level, when you came back later and did the level in reverse, that droid would unlock something for you. It's like that sort of persistence. We did something.
So I think, there was some hidden stuff there. I don't think we particularly called that one out. I mean, it ended up being that way, but like I said, we already had a game where you could pretty much kill everyone.
And speaking of NPC behaviors, growing up and playing this game on the PlayStation 1, I always noticed the NPC characters would often go into all sorts of strange directions. The standout was probably Jar Jar just marching straight into the platoon of battle droids on the Naboo swamps.
I remember that it was kind of a time thing. You wanted to get to the cannon quickly and shoot well. I do know, unfortunately, on the PS1, a lot of the pathing stuff was a little different because they had trouble with the size of the levels. I think you pointed out later on one of the levels, the Escort is just nightmarish. We had trouble with it on the PC, and it got only worse on the PlayStation 1 because of the way they had to calculate out the terrain. Yes, that probably was too hard. That's where some user research would have been really helpful. That and the notorious jump on the Gungan level.
Yes, the jump mechanic was quite annoying, but it was nothing compared to the Queen Amidala escort sequence in Theed City. You know, with her endless nagging.
I'm relieved that you've returned for me. When you are ready to continue, you're stepping Jedi. On my dress. I need more room, Obi-Wan. And
her either wandering off somewhere or just not moving at all.
AI stuff nowadays is much more robust than what we had back then, and we were, our guys were sort of guessing as to what it would be like.
We didn't. Nowadays, you'd probably use a spline and have a sort of AI logic where she would proceed along the spline, check for the distance of the player, and then stop and beckon you depending if you're in front or behind. I think this was just hard-coded by a programmer to try to navigate the terrain, and I'm not sure what logic was used.
It was a valiant effort for something that was a limitation.
The Tatooine levels were some of my favorites in the entire game. The little Easter eggs and cameos like Jabba and Max Rebo, it really showed the passion the guys at Big Ape had for Star Wars.
We were all big fans. I mean, we tried to stuff as many little Easter eggs in there. I think we were more fearful that they wouldn't let us put stuff in from the original trilogy because we were always wanting to sneak it in.
They made us take out the Gamorrean guards. We actually had the big dudes in the Mos Espa level were originally going to be Gamorrean guards, and we just, they kept coming back with, take them out of the game, they have to come out now. And so we wound up just, doing I think Eric Wilder did a concept of how we could convert that guy into something that still had the build of a Gamorrean guard and just changed out the model texture stuff.
The Mos Espa level is also infamous for actually locking up the game if you go around on a rampage.
I won't help a murderer like you.
Well, I think we knew that there was a point where you were just breaking the game. We had all sorts of escalation of violence there with the Jawas sort of coming after you. And I think it just got to a point where we said, okay, we have to say this is a lose situation.
That being said, 2 levels later, you're able to slaughter the entire town right after they finish waving goodbye to Anakin. And turns out there's a reason for that.
That level was thrown at the very last second because we suddenly realized that scene existed in the script. And I remember someone saying, oh, we better put this in. So we built that level. It's a tiny little level. And we probably just didn't have time to check that you could just slaughter everybody.
The developers also struggled a little to come up with ideas for the Coruscant level, mainly because that part of the movie had absolutely no action.
I mean, we probably could have left the Coruscant level out, but it was something we built early because there was no other reference we had except they were going there.
Yeah, and seriously, the joke happened more than once of let's make Senate bumper cars, it was like that was the footage or the concept art that we saw, and we're like, well, we are never making gameplay out of this, so what else could we do?
For me, another standout aspect of the game was the various different weapons, from machine guns to grenades and even a rocket launcher, and you could wield all of those as a Jedi. So I asked the guys if they got any pushback from LucasArts for allowing the Jedi to wield these uncivilized weapons.
I don't think so, because at that point we had so little information about what the Jedi were even doing.
Right.
We knew nothing. When we saw the actual footage of them flipping around and doing stuff, we're like, wow, this is a lot more action. They're using a lot more stuff, powers than we ever thought. I think even deflecting the laser beams was not something we were totally aware of at first.
Right.
So by that time, we already had all the weaponry and stuff in the game. All we had was the first 3 movies for reference because we were unable to get any real answers about that. I remember actually asking them about, can you tell us more about what the powers are going to be? We got a really ambiguous answer that just didn't tell us anything until we actually saw film footage, which was probably a month or so before we shipped.
And so all these years later, how do they feel about the game?
You know, looking back at it now, I mean, how many people get to work on a Star Wars game? How many people get to actually do something and feel like you're part of the lore and feel like you're doing something? And, you know, my understanding is it didn't sell very well, but the reviews were not great for our game. Some really valid things were brought up about, you know, could we have done different controls? Could there have been if we built it with more like a strafe camera move system, would that have felt more intuitive on a PC? Probably. So I don't know. I feel like definitely a lot of pride, particularly looking back. Like this was literally the last time that you could get a studio of 8 guys putting together a Star Wars product. It's never going to happen again. And so to feel part of that and to know that we actually did put together something of this size with, you know, our own belief in ourselves, I think that's great.
For me, you know, I was very proud that we got it done on time, because that was really where the pressure was on our relationship with Lucas, and that we were getting it done on time for them. It's not my most proudest game that I've worked on, because I'm probably better known for working on Zombies Ate My Neighbors. To me, that was a really fun thing to work on. Both Ray and John and myself have worked together we went on to work together on many more projects. So I made some good friends. We were on Skylanders and the Madagascar games. And I think you mentioned it, Simpsons Wrestling, which was another adventure.
And speaking of which, I did have a great conversation with the guys about developing the Simpsons Wrestling game. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for that video in the near future. But I couldn't finish this video without letting both the gentlemen know about how much the Phantom Menace game meant to so many of us fans. And here is what they had to say.
It's really nice to have that sense of a community with people who appreciate what you're doing. I mean, we didn't pull everything off to the level that we wanted to, but the moving targets that we had for this game, I felt like we did a really nice, did a good effort, and all of us worked very hard. You know, I know Mike was absolutely glued to his, you know, making sure that everything was working. There were a handful of times that I think we pulled all-nighters. One of my favorite memories is Mike sort of looking at something that I wanted to build. Like I'm building models and animating stuff, and he's like, I don't know if we have time to actually put that in. And so he'd go home, and I'd like, okay. And then like by the next morning, I'd have it placed in the level. It's like, I think most of the wildlife in the swamps, the giant flying droid things that walk around in the Fed ship at the beginning was all stuff that just, because we were passionate about it, we were able to just sort of say, let's just put something together. And I think it worked out great.
A huge thanks to both Mike and Ray for their time. Please stay tuned for part 2, where the guys talk about the content they had to cut from the game, including the Gungan battle level, multiplayer, and a more realistic lightsaber option. Here is a little snippet from that conversation.
And so Obi's walking through Mos Espa just lopping off arms. That would just be like a thing that would happen as part of their death animation. So like a limb would come off as they're dying.
A big thanks to the entire team at Big Ape for their passion and dedication to the project. Please leave a comment and let the guys know about your experiences and memories with the game, and generally what the Phantom Menace game meant to you. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow me on Twitter. See you next time.